Hello and welcome to another episode of Spark Talk. Today we're bringing you another episode which focuses on our latest issue of Women and Revolution, where in the last episode we spoke about the challenges facing the left in dealing with the growing social polarizations. In this episode, we're getting right into the theme of the issue, which is the question of youth. What's going on with youth today? At least in the West. Growing up and coming of age in this turbulent period, the future looks uncertain for huge layers of young people. The traditional path of university education is increasingly less promising. And as one of the articles in the latest issue argues, youth today see no future. So to discuss these things and more, I'm joined today by Comrade Felix, author of said article. Welcome, Felix.
Hi, Mansa. It's an honor to be on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for making the time. Okay, so look, this is not something we've ever talked about on the show. We, as an organization, have also not written very much on the question of youth. So I want to start very broad, and I'd like to actually ask you first to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. You are yourself a young person.
Yes, I am a young person indeed. Specifically, I'm a high school student in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And also somewhat particularly, I go to a Francophone high school. So I'm, as I like to say, I'm in a bit of a bubble, but I definitely am of the youth, and I have an intersection with many other young people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
okay, cool. So Francophone in English Canada.
Yeah,
that
is interesting.
I think anybody who's familiar with North America or Canada, for that matter, will understand just how much of a bubble you might be in.
Yeah.
But okay, look. So your article is called "Youth See No Future." Some might, depending on where they're coming from, either being totally out of touch with where youth are at today, or God knows. But some might think that that's quite an extreme statement.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't think so, but I want to ask you just very generally, like, where are you coming from when you approached writing about youth today? Like, what's behind this headline?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I would think I kind of approach this from two different directions. First of all, I'm in the youth, so in the discussions I would have with friends and all that, everyone kind of has this dominant sense of just uncertainty is the way that I would put it, that the old guarantees no longer exist. So that's kind of the first, where I was first coming from. And then the other direction is politically from this group, the ICL. And we've written a lot about the dominant trends in the world and the decline of U.S. hegemony, all of that stuff. And one of the challenges we've been, I think, trying to address recently is trying to look at in a concrete way what this means for this or that group, for what is the rise of reaction and right-wing populism and the decline of U.S. imperialism mean for like Black people in the U.S. or trans people or the youth. So I was kind of coming from those two directions and trying to explain how exactly, trying to get a sense of, okay, on the one hand, how do I explain what I'm seeing amongst my peers? And on the other hand, how do we bring our understanding of the world to the youth? How can we explain that all of this that's happening has a bearing on the youth?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I appreciate the intersection that you've just laid out between like your social, environment and what you're seeing amongst your peers and the political options out there and also what needs to be done. So I think that sets the stage quite nicely for the rest of the discussion. I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit more about what do you see amongst your peer? Like what's it like? Because I think for instance, on the left, there is a huge trend on the left which thinks, okay, youth are certainly becoming disaffected, but that's just making them more radical, more left-wing. They just want to, they want a revolution, etc.
Right.
One doesn't get that sense so much from reading your piece. We'll come to that later but I guess, what are you seeing amongst your peers?
Yeah, very, very good question. I think a lot of it is in addition to the uncertainty, there's a number of problems, actually, I would say. One of them is just inertia, that you can sense that, okay, this path I'm walking on is very unstable. It doesn't necessarily, I know it's not leading me to where exactly I want to be. As I put it in the article, like this crumbling bridge. Um, so there's that, there's the inertia, but there's also a lot of confusion and a lack of clarity. What is behind all of this? And I guess this kind of makes sense. You're when you're steeped in it, it's hard to get a sense of the big picture. Like the fish that can't see the water it's swimming in. So that makes sense. And then there's also like just the sense of powerlessness. You understand things aren't going in the right direction, that things are broken. Like the youth confront this on a daily basis. Like I'm thinking of the transport system here in Toronto. It's just so bad. Right? And it's just like those minute things that we deal with on a daily basis. And you're seeing all of these things happening in the world. You don't, it's like these invisible forces that are just responsible for all this chaos. And so you just feel so powerless. I think that's one of the things.
So inertia, confusion, and this feeling of powerlessness.
Yeah. Okay. Plus you also have like political dynamics, right? Where the right is the force that gets to tap into this uncertainty and obviously this feeling that everything is broken. They aren't scared to say that, and so they are benefiting. They are the main force, I think, that is benefiting from the dire situation that the youth are facing.
Yeah, for sure. This is one of the things in one of the, by the way, if our listeners haven't got a paper copy of the issue, please go check it out. It's absolutely beautiful. But in, one of the photos we have a montage of, for example, like right-wing parties and leaders in Europe and in sort of imperialist countries, and you have people like Nigel Farage. But basically, they're all orienting to youth because they understand, and this was a huge component of how Trump also oriented to a lot of young men in
100%,
terms of his base as well. I think increasingly as the world gets more turbulent, we're going to see that youth is going to become one of the terrains on which these polarizations are going to play out in quite an intense way. I want to get your take on, now when we're talking about youth, there's immediately two questions that pop into my mind, at least two. One is parenting. Like I think one thing we see and hear about a lot, in fact I just saw that Manitoba is one of the provinces of Canada. They've issued a ban on social media and AI for people under, 16?
Yeah, I saw that as well.
Yeah. That debate is happening in Britain. Australia has just passed this ban, and more and more countries are entertaining this kind of stuff. This is something we touch on throughout the issue, that there are risks to this, and parents often end up really latching on to these conservative proposals. How do you, what's your take on the place of parents, I guess?
Well, I think broadly speaking, a lot of parents, they do care about their children, and it is mainly out of concern for them and wanting to protect them from the evils of the world, that they, there's an appeal to these sort of measures. Also, something that I encounter, especially in my bubble, in my school, which is more predominantly middle class, in addition to francophone, where there's some very strong parental expectations to go to university, find some nice, comfy career, like in the liberal professions or something like that, and that does create a lot of. But it all comes from. Parents want what's best for their children. I think, broadly speaking, obviously there are exceptions to that, but
I think maybe coming from the right place. I think teachers definitely probably belong in this to some degree, but then, not. But then the solutions they're ultimately pushing or supporting are actually very repressive, and I'd like to get to later the whole question of what exactly to do and how to break down these divisions, which is, I think, quite necessary. The other question that immediately comes is that of schools. Now, this we've got an article on schools. One thing we hear about schools, at least in Britain, is the growth of misogyny. Schools are
Yes.
also, as the infrastructure around education is completely breaking down,
Yeah.
etc. What's your, I guess, experience of education?
So, I mean, obviously, this has to be put in the context of the school that I'm in. Um, just recently, for example, like uh, the Ontario government just announced this new sort of law. I think it's called like putting student success first law or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are many things in it, like tying grades to attendance, which I know a lot of students are completely against. But another thing, and this affects like my school, is they've essentially they're dissolving one of the commissions they'd set up for francophone education in the province. What that means concretely, we don't really know yet, but it is an attack against the francophone uh, education system and I guess the francophone community in Ontario. But just the fact that schools are completely decrepit and not at all places where students can really thrive, and it's also really bad for the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is very widespread. Students know that,
Mm-hmm.
and teachers know that. And a big problem too is that this creates lots of tensions between the students and teachers,
Mm-hmm.
though they do share a common enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, I'm glad you went there. In fact, one of the feedbacks we have already received on one of these articles, on the articles on schools, is that I think a certain sense of uneasiness or yeah, maybe uneasiness is the right word, at the claim that that schools aren't places where students thrive. Because I think this is again one of those things where it's sort of ingrained that you go to school,
Right,
you get an education,
right,
you learn things, and then it's this onward and upward curve of progression as a human. It's a
right.
very liberal conception. So I think
Yes.
outside of the heads of leftists and communists, they're like, wait, what are you talking about? Schools aren't places where students thrive. That's what they're meant for, you know?
In the abstract, yeah,
Yeah.
sounds great. But again, I would just ask that person if they've ever been to a school recently, or if not, the second best option would be to watch like a adolescence or a show like that, or a number of different documentaries, or ask a young person.
Yeah.
Even those who are very studious and say they love school, I'm sure they have 1,000 things to complain about. So guess
Yeah.
that would be my response. Like from the
What's your top three
regimentation,
complaints?
top three. Okay, I think the first thing, and this is the most obvious one, is just that they're not well equipped, both in terms of like staffing. There's not enough teachers. Like I'll give you an example. Like we had um this was a couple years ago, but um, a teacher had applied for a position as an art teacher, but they were so short staffed that they ended up putting her like in a science position and French, and she was totally not qualified to teach those classes at all.
Yeah.
But it's like, and she has no supports. There are no resources that she could have.
Mhm.
Well, I'm sure there were, but she wasn't given those any resources to look at. Okay, how do I do this? And well, it just created a bunch of tensions between the students who really hated her. But it's like we're both getting screwed by the those at the top here. So
Yeah.
that's a concrete example of how like
Yeah.
it's
I've
just
heard instances of that kind of situation
yeah,
so often. Yeah, I think that's definitely a thing.
yeah. Um, so yeah, the schools are not equipped. The other thing is just like regimentation, which I
Mhm.
think is starting to, I guess, not really be reintroduced, but they're upping the ante, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
Um, an example I think that I find really ridiculous in my school is we're supposed to be given tickets to pay for the public transport. The school is supposed to pay those for us.
Mhm.
And so every student is entitled to, I think, 30 per month. But if you're late or if you skip class, they remove one from your tally for every month. So it's like, okay, if you're late because the transportation system is shitty, then what? They remove like a ticket from. So some end up getting 30, others get like 20.
So if you're late, you have to pay out of your own pocket?
Yes, yes.
My God,
If you
that
skip
sounds so
school,
vindictive. That
it
sounds
is.
so
It sucks.
vindictive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Again, like I don't think my school is the worst of the worst.
Mhm.
If you go to more like working class neighborhoods, there, like for example, I just recently the government again another law that they had passed was like cops in schools. This doesn't
Mhm.
affect my school, but I
Mhm.
know that it does affect other more working class schools, and that
Mhm.
again is just really really bad and a very clear indication of um, what they're trying to do with the youth. The screws are being turned, as we say.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I appreciate you giving us. Again, I'm just thinking of like our listeners, as I said, I think probably we don't talk enough about the actual conditions, experiences facing youth. And I think even
Hmm.
from back when I was in high school, I think things have changed quite a lot. Where I think
Hmm.
the main thing, if I can, the main thing in my opinion that's changed is this growing sense of anxiety and uncertainty. I think, back in the day, you would kind of just sleepwalk into graduation and then university, and then it's just you keep going on this road because
Right.
that's just established and that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that's just becoming far less of a thing now.
100%.
Especially in like the social sciences and humanities courses, like why would you spend thousands and thousands of dollars or pounds or whatever to do that, which is
That's
unfortunate.
no, it is 100%. But it is that again back to the problem of inertia. It's like the young people feel that uncertainty, but a lot of them are still walking that old path.
Hmm.
Um, but that the material basis for that path is crumbling, right? So a lot, back then you could kind of do that. Those illusions and
Hmm.
uh, social mobility and education, they weren't so much illusions as they are today.
Hmm.
But now that's no longer the case. But a lot of the youth are still following that as kind of the shining star which guides them. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, there's a danger there.
Hmm. And would you say that this is because I one thing I did appreciate about your article is that you sort of go over, there's middle class youth and then there's like working class
Hmm.
and those from minority backgrounds. Would you say that that inertia is sort of uniform across the different layers of youth?
Um, yeah, I would even for the working class layers of youth. Um, it's not inertia in the sense of okay, I'm going to university. That road has been closed to them.
Hmm.
But that wasn't necessarily always the case. Like in 30 years ago, again, whole point of social mobility. You could
Hmm.
go to education and uh, advance to the middle classes. But I guess for a lot of the working class youth today, one of the things I feel, because I'm kind of between the two. I'm consciously trying to go into the working class, but
Hmm.
I'm also in a milieu that's predominantly middle class. So I
Hmm.
kind of get of both, get to see both worlds.
Hmm.
One of the things that I think so. We have these like trades fairs
Hmm.
that our school brings us to, and they're pretty bad, honestly. There's this OYAP program. It's an Ontario Youth Apprenticeship Program. The idea is to help youth get connected to like apprenticeships in the trades. It's like
Hmm.
okay, great in the abstract. In the hands of who this program is, it's actually supposed to speed run everything to the detriment of like okay, you're for one thing your freedom to try things out, right? If you
Hmm.
okay, I'm gonna do it with for the mill rights thing. Okay, but now
Hmm.
you're stuck in that path. They don't really let you leave so easily. And when you're at the trades fair, it's actually like it's kind of ridiculous that they everyone is trying to sell you something, and it can be overwhelming. And they have very nice, big, flashy numbers to throw in your face about how much you're going to make when you're in the trades. Obviously,
Right.
what they don't mention is like you're not working for like the conditions for one thing, and then the hours is the other thing.
Okay, let's start transitioning to the sort of political side of things, because one of the things we talk about a lot on this show, but one of the things we Spartacists write about a lot is the growing right wing. And I think obviously youth are not immune to that. We've already sort of touched on that. But in your article, you talk about certain realignments that are happening amongst youth, that in the face of growing uncertainty, also these sort of reactionary bigots and the right that tap into that sense of vulnerability, uncertainty, etc., that they're benefiting from this, etc. So explain to us what your sense is of what realignments are we speaking about here?
So I think that is the main thing that's getting a lot of attention in the media, is these realignments, because it's what especially like parents, adults can see in a clear way. But I think it's important to situate it in the context first of, we have to take as our starting point, what is the objective situation that the youth are facing? And then we can see those realignments as products and reflections of that, reactions to that reality. So there's a number of them. Like one of them would be like military recruitment, which is on the rise, I think, pretty much across the Western world. And this is very interesting, and there's a material argument to be made here. Like what is the appeal of the military? It's you give your body to, I guess, to the army, the military, and in exchange you get shelter, a community, food, an education. And in a context where, okay, there's this uncertainty and the old promise of just prosperity and social mobility through the route of higher education, when that's no longer really viable, obviously the military has great appeal, and obviously they're trying to tap into that. So there are for military recruitment.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of the material question, having shelter, good, decent paycheck, etc. But I was actually recently having a conversation with somebody, and it's on the Canadian military, which is that they actually have pretty decent pension packages. Like, it's more than that. It's actually a pretty stable, pretty decent career from the side. I haven't looked into it, and I feel cringe almost saying this, but I can see that there's shrinking job pools, and in the face of all of that, it's like, well, why not? And then, of course, that taps into the growing sort of nationalism, which we're also seeing, the growing towards the rearmament, etc. So it all sort of coalesces and presents the military almost as like, okay, well, why not? It all makes sense. Yeah. And I assume this is obvious. I'm assuming that this is refracted around gender.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think primarily it's a big appeal to a lot of young men. And part of that is not just a material question. Part of it too has to be seen in the context of like the gender wars, the gender divide, where a lot of young men have this feeling that masculinity was stigmatized. And so there is an appeal in the military again to kind of reclaim that pride, I guess. Or an escape.
Yeah, manhood, I'm the protector, I'm the provider.
Yeah.
All of those things that are traditionally associated with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's the whole question of religion as well.
Exactly.
There's been so many articles I've seen in the last, I don't know, a year at least, where it's talking about how young men, especially I think in the United States, you're seeing this, that they're turning to the church, which is, again, when you think of youth, I think we're so trained to see youth as like, okay, well, you guys are going to be the more liberal generation, like, the generation that sheds like the sort of traditional stuff. But in fact, we're seeing a reversal of sorts.
Yeah. And it's not just like on the question of religion, it's also political, like the left and the right. That's what I got me thinking so much. Like, I'm a huge fan of the comedian George Carlin, and he was always he had a great appeal to the young generation, denouncing the church, the right, etc. But now that's completely kind of reversed. Now it's countercultural to be right wing or to turn to religion. So you do have this reversal. It is interesting to say the least. And I do see that, like, on, it's not just like headlines. I do see it within those around me. I mean, again, I think it has to be viewed like in the context of uh, the youth feeling that they have no future. And well, then, okay, you have to ask, what is religion? Religion is in large part like a sort of outlet for fear and despair, which is the main thing that's gripping the youth today. So I think it, again, there's a logic to that. I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you, obviously we've already just touched on the fact that this is reflected along gender lines. So where, you know, I can see young men being more drawn to the military. Do you, in your reading and your experience, does religion sort of equally appeal to both genders, or is there a difference there that we're seeing?
There's still a difference there. Like, I think, again, religion is mostly appealing to young men. And you're getting into like this trend of wanting to go back to traditional values, I guess. This is the fight for the youth, a fight for a return to traditional values, which obviously is wrong, but it does come from somewhere that's real. And I think, like, the military, the shift to the right, like manosphere, Andrew Tate, and religion, they're all interconnected into that that same trend.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that gives us enough of a sense of just, I think it looks bleak today. It's quite sad. It looks bleak today for young people. And yeah, you guys are entering a world which is, I think, more and more unstable every day. So for me, the question as leftists is, what do we do about it? You know, and I
100%.
kind of already mentioned at the start, we've got, for example, the Revolutionary Communist Party type folks who say, okay, well, become a communist. Well, fine. Is that the de facto sort of outlet or solution that young people see? From our conversation, I'm not really seeing that. But I guess, yeah, what do we do? Or rather, yeah, what's your answer? I mean, how do you try and actually talk to your classmates? I was going to say coworkers. How do you try and talk to your classmates about, like, hey, you know, let's snap out of this inertia, do something. Right. What do we do?
So I think first you have to, we already talked about this, but getting a sense of what the problem here is and what is at stake. Obviously, so there's the inertia, there's this lack of clarity and confusion, and just there's this sort of, like to see it as this storm that is approaching. You have to be ready to face it. So I think that's just broadly it. But the first thing that I would say is that the youth need to become conscious of and understand the position that they are in, kind of take a step back, see the whole picture. Because understanding your situation is the first important step to working to change it. So I think that's the first thing. You also, part of that too, you have to understand what is and isn't possible. Once you understand your situation, you must then understand, you know, what the way out of it is. And this also means understanding the limits of the choices on offer, as we say in another article. So, like, you know, the doors to higher education and these careers in the liberal professions are closing to the majority. Like here in Ontario, concretely, the OSAP program, OSAP, which is supposed to give granting to students to go to higher education, that is being cut massively by the government. So it's a very concrete illustration of the fact that these doors are closing. The ruling class can no longer afford having such a large portion of the population and the youth finding jobs and creative careers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So the decision is it is posed: are you going to struggle as an individual to swim against the stream and have a shot at making it across this crumbling bridge and uh, finding a nice, comfortable job? Or are you going to go down with, not down, but are you going to follow the rest of your generation uh, into the working class, basically?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to get at here is um, individual escape routes may be open to a few, but for the majority, this is no longer an option. And so the way out instead is collective struggle. You have to realize that your own fate is tied to the fate of the youth as a collective, which in turn is tied to the fate of the working class.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever tried to make these arguments to like a non-leftist student your age?
It's hard. It is hard because, as with everything, you have to be concrete. But yeah, because a lot of this is okay. Sounds nice and abstract, but what does that mean concretely? But so I know a few youth who are going into the working class. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That there's part of it too is you have to do it with your eyes wide open, understand what you're getting into. Like the working class and the union movement is in a very dire situation here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Part of
I think.
yeah,
But
yeah, exactly. Like I'm friends with an electrician, and uh, I'm always talking to him, and he's always saying to me that he genuinely believes that he's the last generation of the public sector worker because of like contracting out and all that.
Right.
And that hits home for like people like me who are trying to go into the public sector. Mm-hmm. So just being conscious of, again, your situation, what you're getting into, what the direction of travel is. Yeah.
I think that's very sobering. In fact, we were just having a discussion here yesterday about transit in this country, which is, everything's been subcontracted out to no end.
Right.
So, I think as leftists, it's like, oh yeah, go become a worker. But then it's like, then there's a reality of that, which is nothing glamorous about it. It's actually really tough. The union movement is totally on the back foot, like all of that. But I think I appreciate you saying that this has to be a conscious choice. Once you understand like what's driving all this, then you understand your choices, and then you understand, okay, well, yeah, my fate is tied to that of the working class, which is a whole lot of struggle that's needed. I appreciate that. I did have one question.
Mm-hmm.
I think you sort of laid out, okay, in order to what to do, first you got to become conscious of the position that you find yourself in, which I think is key. One thing I've heard from some of my teacher friends is like just that young people today, I think you talk about this here, escapism. Like you kind of want to just not look at reality. Yeah. Or maybe that's not conscious, but it's just like they have no clue often like what's going on out there in the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how how, I guess it's more of a question even for like leftists like ourselves, like how do we actually try and bring that consciousness about their situation into the youth movement?
Yeah. I think that it reduces itself to, we are in a period where you have to be prepared and understanding what is coming. So in addition to just having a solid understanding of your position, you also have to be properly armed. So that means studying politics. It means being grounded in reality. Avoiding the news and avoiding politics, I think, is very understandable for a lot of the youth. But it's what this amounts to in this period is disarming yourself at a time when you have to be most well armed. So a lot of the youth, they just see politics as very demoralizing, and they're very cynical about it. They don't see it as empowering, just stress inducing. They see it as the source of all of society's ills instead of the way out. And that makes sense, again. But part of our task too, as revolutionaries, is to make a concrete case. Fight for socialism is not an answer, but you have to make a concrete case to the youth. Why is politics? Why do you have to study politics? What is the way out? A concrete answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's fair enough. One of the things about becoming conscious, which you talk about, is the need to break with liberalism. Again, it's a bit jarring for me because one thing, we talk about like, oh, the last 30, 35 years. And it's like, well, that's like history to young people, But how do I think I appreciate the emphasis on making this concrete. Like the break with liberalism is of course concrete. So you have this thing, this nice little fun little piece that I really enjoyed on critical thinking, which I think might be a way of getting into like what is liberalism and why is that actually totally a chain around the feet of youth that chains them back, and how that is totally the education systems, it's saturated with liberalism. There are institutions that are reproducing the ideology of the ruling class.
Exactly.
And I think schools as like sort of havens of liberalism are a bit behind the curve in terms of how the direction of society is changing, but that's going to come sooner or later. But still, in the meantime, you talk about the morass of liberal pedagogy. I think it'd be fun to get into that a little bit about, liberalism, like in the concrete.
Yeah. Very fun indeed. I agree.
Yeah.
I think the first thing, just to make it very clear why the youth need to break with liberalism, you're kind of faced with, a lot of young people are faced with the choice, either you go down with liberalism because it's a sinking ship, or you break with it. So in that sense, it's an objective material necessity, but it's also a political one, especially for those who genuinely want to take a stand and fight against the right. Well, first you have to break with, free yourself, and take a stand against the ideology which fuels it. So I think just as a broad point, why you have to break with liberalism. Obviously, there are a number of other concrete arguments we can make on how it's led to the defeat of every movement out there, the Black struggle or trans people, etc. So just having that in the back of our minds first of why it's necessary. I guess for that article, I've always felt like something was wrong when I was kind of a student in the high school. I still am, obviously. And the more I got political and went in the direction of Marxism, the more this feeling intensified. I remember I had read the ABCs of communism at a certain point, and there's this chapter on what the education system is, or the Marxist understanding of the education system. We understand it as you said very, very well. It is an institution that serves capitalism, and so it trains the youth on one hand, but it also has to transmit the ruling class ideology to them. So okay, I thought that was great, but there was sort of like a discrepancy between what I was reading and what I was seeing in my own, like at school. And it wasn't until, funnily enough, again, to bring back George Carlin, it wasn't until I had listened to one of his skits from 2008 that it sort of clicked, because he has this whole skit where he's denouncing education as indoctrination, and, the powers that be, they don't want a population capable of critical thinking. It's basically when he used that word that it clicked for me, because almost overnight, and what I see when I go to school, education is all about critical thinking. So anyways, that's kind of what pushed me to want to write this, because I couldn't put my finger on it. But I think it's very simple in that this doctrine, this idea of critical thinking in schools, is not neutral. It functions as a vehicle for liberal ideology. It is the means through which the ruling class transmits, or used to transmit, its dominant ideology, liberalism.
You make the point that it's not the concept of critical thinking in the abstract. Like, of course, we want to be thinkers who are able to be critical about things, but I think it's how it's almost become this official dogma of the sort of liberal intelligentsia for the last number of decades. And I think this is what we concretely see in terms of, for example, the right going after the, woke and the assault on the Ivy Leagues and the universities, and, shutting down this or that department in the social sciences. Like, I think a lot of it is driven by that. Would you Would you agree, or am I kind of linking things
No,
unnecessarily here?
I think you're right on. And then you get to the problem of, okay, well, where's the left?
Mm,
Because the right is the one that correctly denounces the education system as indoctrination and all of that.
mm,
And I think part of the reason why the left is absent in this debate is because it itself is kind of mired in the swamp of liberalism.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you're going to be a Marxoid, quote unquote, Marxoid professor in the universities,
Oh my
that
God,
necessarily
yes.
means adapting to some of the doctrines and the morality and the norms of that milieu.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that just the trauma of my past life.
right,
Like academic Marxism is entirely imbibed with liberalism. You have to
yeah,
make Marxism palatable to
yeah,
the university. And how are you going to do that? Obviously, it's by, they make it all fashionable and it just
yeah.
turns into nothingness and you lose its actual essence in terms of like how to fight for a revolution. But yeah, no,
And then it
I
becomes just
agree with that.
abstractly comparing worldviews, right?
Yeah,
That's exactly what I
without any
didn't want to do.
repercussions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's also what didn't want to do with this article on critical thinking. Like, I'm not just I wasn't trying to abstractly denounce critical thinking as bourgeois ideology.
Hmm.
It concretely has implications for how we think about things and how we wage struggles in the real world, and that's why
Hmm.
it is an obstacle which the youth. It's kind of like a straitjacket that the youth have to break out of.
Hmm.
Um, and again, like, I appreciate the point that you raised. Yes, in the article, I make the point. It's not the idea of critical thinking in the abstract that we're against,
Mhm.
because ideas don't exist in the abstract. They,
Mhm.
in this particular case, this great idea of critical thinking has a political purpose,
Yeah.
and that is what we are against.
Yeah.
It is being used by the ruling class to advance its interests.
Absolutely. And I think I want to bring in the other sort of angle to this, which is, we're talking about liberal pedagogy here. So obviously
Mm,
teachers are implicated and teachers are a notoriously liberal grouping or whatever, we've run articles on schools here in Workers Hammer for the last number of issues. And as I said, there's a couple of articles on schools, but I think this is where the role of education unions also comes in. And
yes.
so, oftentimes education unions will be they'll be a little bit more the liberal progressive types, taking up social questions, but they'll do it in a very, very liberal way that is indistinguishable
Yeah.
from what basically the state says. I really appreciate you have this. I just want to read it out. You have a couple of sentences here. You say, youth are supposed to be, quote, above ideology. They're supposed to approach every question as neutral observers, to see both sides, to proceed only from facts and evidence rather than one's material stakes in a conflict. And that's like the bread and butter of teachers in many ways.
Right. Yeah.
That you are
100%.
above ideology, and that and that's it. This is not an immaterial question. For example, if you actually look at like teaching regulations, you look at like in Britain, for example, it's literally baked into teachers' contracts and teaching standards, like how the profession
Yeah.
is run, which is you have to be neutral,
Yeah.
and so many teachers were gone after, not just here, but in other countries as well. Like when the genocide happened, it's like, oh, well, we're just
Yeah.
showing you both sides of the picture here.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, this is like the whole bankruptcy and the reactionary nature of, quote, critical thinking of like, okay, you just have to look at something as this like detached observer and you just have to look at
Exactly.
both sides of it.
Yeah.
And then you actually test that out. For example, in the genocide, it's like, well, no, that is the totally reactionary way of teaching young people. So, but I think for me,
Yeah.
it's important to bring in teachers and the teachers' unions here as well, and how you need to fight for a different conception of education as well. And I think that's one of the ways, if the unions actually start to do something about this question, that's one of the ways you'll actually start to see some basis for improvement
Yeah.
amongst, improvement for youth, the basis of, changing how schools are run, the basis for some kind of unity between youth and teachers. Because right now, teachers very much, I think, imbibe that whole ideology, and the unions I think it's in large part because of unions, because there's no other alternative framework out there.
Yeah, no, 100%. I appreciate that point, and I see it in like truth and reconciliation is a big thing in Canada. I think that very
Just explain what
concretely.
that is for a non-Canadian audience.
Yes, for sure. Canada, like the US, was a state built upon the dispossession of Indigenous peoples, and Indigenous oppression is still very much real. And the ruling class devised this very clever trick to kind of transpose the guilt onto the population through this thing of truth and reconciliation. This idea that, we'll reconcile ourselves with Indigenous peoples and spread the truth. And this is really big in the education system. All the time we're talking about it. And at this point, I feel like for a lot of youth, they just roll their eyes, like the constant land acknowledgements, right? And it actually is quite reactionary too, because it creates a division between it actually sets up Indigenous peoples as targets for a reactionary backlash. Like, to give an example of that same electrician friend I have, his workplace was dealing with contracting out, and they were in contract negotiations for like 8 or 9 months, I think. And they wouldn't hear a thing from the union for like months and months and months. And then one morning you wake up and you have in your inbox finally an email from the union. You open it though, and it's just we are pleased to announce that we have updated our land acknowledgement. Please make sure to familiarize yourself with it. It's like in the mind of these workers, it very obviously sets up Indigenous peoples as a target.
Yeah, it's just the most hollow lip service to that question. And yeah, it's become so much from afar. Anyways, I think I remember this when it first started becoming a thing, and it would be more for like the progressive sort of circles where they would, start anything with the land acknowledgement. But I think now it's become very much just like before you sit down for lunch, you do it.
Yes. Land acknowledgement before we open up the factory for exploitation. It's like, okay.
Yeah. And exactly. I appreciate that. This is what it does is it makes people resent the actual necessary and urgent struggle for Indigenous people.
Yeah,
it makes
it's also like
that.
Indigenous peoples don't need a new land acknowledgement. They need clean water. Like, I'm sorry, but
the situation in the reserves is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So just some empty words isn't going to cut it. And I think that's for sure. Okay. Look, to start bringing this to a close, you mentioned at some point in our discussion that you are somebody who's consciously, you're consciously looking to the working class because you understand that this is the way forward for youth. I wonder if I think this is an argument that needs to be made to a lot of young people. Look, you need to snap out of the inertia. You actually need to go and join the ranks of the working class, and that's not going to be easy. It's manual work, it's hard work, and moreover, you're going to be surrounded you're going to be in the midst of a situation which is not rosy, politically, and so on and so forth. So that's not a great pitch, to say the least. Why? But I wonder if to other young folks listening, I would like to ask you to maybe motivate why they should also become workers.
So I think we've already mentioned that the fate of the collective fate of the youth is tied to that of the working class. And again, with this path of just going to university and finding yourself a nice, comfy job, being close to most, again, the question is posed to the majority: are you going to try and defy all odds, or are you going to go into the working class as a conscious choice again? To try and fight to put it in a stronger position. And I think that really is the task posed not just for the youth, but for the communist movement, the working class and the unions are so very weak right now. You can't, like, the RCP is always known for any situation, the solution is planned occupations. But it's like if the workers go on planned occupations right now in the weakened state they are right now, they could get crushed. So it's very, very important. You know, we have a big stake in strengthening the working class, rebuilding the unions. And part of that is the big question of leadership, too. You have to do it consciously, knowing that the trade union bureaucracy is an obstacle that it's responsible for leading the unions into their weakened state today. So I think as a general point, that's how I would motivate it. I would also like to throw out that, yeah, it's not a rosy picture we're painting here. It's just the objective reality. Sorry, but it's like this. I think it's the best way out and the only way out for the youth. Where, for example, isolation is a very real problem, especially in this coming period. So there's a very big need for young people to also root themselves in collective struggle, and rooting yourself into the working class. I like the way that we posted in an article a while ago. I think it's called Brace for Impact. You know, there's a great big storm that's coming.
Yeah.
Would you rather be on a large vessel as part of a bigger unified crew that can work together to batten down the hatches? Or would you rather just be on your own little life raft? And, well, if you are, then you better be praying to water god Poseidon, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think that's a general point.
Yeah, I think that's an apt analogy when it comes to the question of youth. I hadn't thought about that article for a while, but that's a very good analogy. Now, obviously, our discussion, in many ways, I mean, this is a leftist podcast. It's directed to any young person who's going to be listening to it, probably going to be a leftist. So it's pitched at those young people who maybe have actually a choice. You know, do I go to university?
Yeah.
But, you know, speaking from experience, the truth is, a huge layer is also don't. Like, you don't have a choice but to just go get a job.
Yeah.
And that's for me another important argument, which is you got to go where the rest of your generation is going also, you know?
Yeah.
And what they're going into is, you know, jobs where there's no unions, you know, unorganized workers, where there's lots of de-skilling happening as a result of AI. So if you are a leftist, if you are a conscious person who wants to go and fight for, you know, a socialist party, you want to fight for revolution, actually it makes sense that, one, you're doing this consciously, as you've just laid out quite nicely, but also that you got to go with where the rest of your people are going to go.
Yeah.
You know, and that to me also really links up with the whole question of leadership. Anyways, just wanted to.
Yeah. I just thought of something else too on I want to bring it just briefly, the OSAP struggle that has recently been raging on and now has been extinguished by the leadership in Ontario. But I think that is a very good example. It's that struggle is the embodiment of, one, the need that the youth integrate themselves in collective struggle, but also that there's a danger therein, and that we, as communists, it is our duty to warn them against that danger, which is the question of leadership, which is really, really essential. Because the OSAP stuff, this was a question where the most immediate and direct material conditions of the youth were actually at stake. So it was very important that they rallied to its defense. And of course, everyone on the left made that appeal to the youth. Join the struggle. That's good, yes. But where are we now? The NDP and the CFS, the leadership of this movement, they took that energy and they channeled it into useless parliamentary tricks and motions. And so this isn't an abstraction. It has very concrete implications in that now the movement is basically demobilized. So I think we make this appeal to the youth in a very clear-eyed way, and we ask them to join these struggles in the same spirit, knowing full well that there are obstacles here, And that, again, that's this primary task of the left, is to lay out this question of leadership, and the youth need to integrate themselves into this debate, which way forward. But first, this is incumbent on the left to lay out, okay, here's the clash of strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is as good a point as any to link this to the broader discussions that we often have on this podcast, that the whole world situation today is defined by US imperialism going on the offensive. And that's the source of all this instability. Youth are, on the front lines of this because they don't have their sort of futures sorted out yet. And increasingly that future looks very, very bleak and uncertain. So in fact, the left needs to make the youth a priority in terms of providing a perspective, providing an orientation, and making that case that you've laid out. So, and that's what this issue of WNR, Women in Revolution, was trying to do. And I hope we'll have more discussions on youth in the coming period. But this is an attempt at getting that discussion started. So I appreciate that you came on and gave us a bit of a sense of what life looks like from your point of view. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Really, honestly, I mean, other than I do want to give an example on the critical thinking stuff.
Yeah.
Again, because I do feel it's just to make it more concrete why this is an obstacle to action. I have a friend who is in the International Baccalaureate and the Model UN Club. So these are great bastions of liberalism and this critical thinking stuff. But they're also very political. And so I asked them recently over the Iran war what they thought. And they said, well, it's against international law. It didn't go through Congress, blah, blah, blah. Iran has a right to defend itself. So I asked them, well, say it didn't go against international law. And as like with the Korean War, for example, the UN sanctioned it, right? Would you still be saying that Iran had a right to defend itself? And they said yes. And so I'm like, okay, well, why bring up the point about international law and the war's illegality as a basis for opposition to it, right? And they were actually very clear-minded and said, oh, that was probably the Model UN me talking. And I'm like, yes, I think it is. But it's just this, it makes sense that that's the way that's their first impulse when there's these questions that arise. That is the way that they're taught to think in school, to view things, legality, morality. But again, that's why this is a sort of liberal straitjacket that has to be broken so that the youth can really integrate themselves into the struggle.
That is an interesting example indeed. Yeah, I think it's the whole point about being trained, Yeah. And that's part of the job of the left, to undo all that damage that the school system does to you. Granted, it gives you useful skills, but then they're all laced with this.
Yeah. Or like bias. Like liberal education tells you to rise above bias, or to be conscious of it, but only to then say you have to keep it at bay. We agree that youth have to become conscious of bias, but to see it as a reflection of social position. So, whereas liberalism will promote this sort of neutrality, we call for the youth to take sides, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I appreciate your time and the discussion. I hope our listeners will find this interesting, and check out the other articles in Women in Revolution, and we'll leave it here. Thanks, Felix.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Well, I ain't got no smoke, at least not with you. And I don't know if you don't know, but there are just a few of oligarchs and capitalists profiting massive profits, holding us down